Hello. Today General Hospital will reveal Maxie had always carried the scars of a turbulent childhood, one overshadowed by her fragile heart and the endless fear that it might one day fail her. Yet after a successful transplant, there was a sense of relief, a fragile hope that she could finally live without the constant shadow of mortality hanging over her. For years, her heart had beaten strongly, giving her the strength to face life's challenges and build a future for herself and her children. That was why the sight of her collapsing in the middle of Deception's live product presentation struck like lightning. One moment she was radiant, presenting the company's skincare line, and the next, she crumpled to the ground, her body betraying her in front of a horrified audience. Panic swept across the room instantly, voices rising in disbelief, and chaos spread as the reality sank in. Maxie was down, and something was terribly wrong. Max stood frozen at first, unable to process what he was seeing. As a man who had devoted his life to law enforcement, he had learned to maintain composure in a crisis, but nothing could prepare him for watching his daughter's heart seemingly betray her once again. He tried to make sense of it, asking Felicia and Cody if they had noticed any warning signs, desperately searching for an explanation that might calm the storm of dread rising inside him. But no one could offer answers. Lucas, rushing to Maxie's side, began emergency measures, his face set in grim determination. At first, he assumed it was a sudden cardiac episode, the sort of tragedy always lurking in the background for someone with Maxie's history. Yet as he monitored her vitals, something didn't add up. The readings didn't match a typical heart attack, the patterns were inconsistent, and Lucas felt a chill creep into his bones. This was no ordinary medical crisis. The suspicion came quickly, whispered first in fragments and then spoken aloud with growing certainty. Just before collapsing, Maxie had applied the Deception face cream live on air. Everyone remembered the smile on her face, the effortless way she demonstrated the product's texture and glow. Lucy had been confident that the formula was safe, defending it against any hint of concern. But the timing was undeniable. Seconds after the cream touched her skin, Maxie's body failed her. The coincidence was too sharp, too cruel, to ignore. Anna was among the first to voice what others only feared to think: the cream had been tampered with. It was no accident. It was sabotage. The question then became not only how but why. And the answer seemed to point in one chilling direction. Among the Deception board, Maxie had stood alone as the voice of conscience. When others hesitated, she was the one who argued for exposing the dirty money trail that linked back to Sonny. She was unafraid of the fallout, unwilling to compromise integrity for profit. Her courage, noble as it was, had made her a threat. In a world built on secrets and fragile alliances, Maxie's determination to do the right thing painted a target squarely on her back. And in the shadow of that target, one name rose above the rest: Sidwell. Sidwell had every reason to silence her. Maxie's refusal to back down threatened the empire of deception and power he relied on. For a man like him, reputation and control meant everything, and a single whistleblower could bring the entire operation crashing down. To strike Maxie down in public, in the middle of a live broadcast, was not only an act of violence but also a calculated message. It was a warning to anyone else who might dare follow her path of defiance. Maxie wasn't just attacked, she was made into an example. Spinelli felt the weight of it immediately. Watching Maxie's collapse shattered him in ways words could not capture. In the chaos, as medics rushed around her, his mind spiraled into paranoia and desperation. He couldn't shake the image of the cream, the elegant container that now seemed less like a beauty product and more like a weapon. He threw himself into the task of unraveling what had happened, examining formulas, supply chains, and every possible point of tampering. To others, it might have seemed obsessive, but for Spinelli, it was the only way to hold on to sanity. He needed to believe that if he worked fast enough, if he was clever enough, he could uncover the truth and somehow save Maxie. But Lucas's words brought new despair. He admitted, reluctantly, that by all accounts Maxie should have regained consciousness by now. The medical intervention had stabilized her heart, her body should have been fighting back, but instead she had slipped deeper into unconsciousness. Her condition was no longer just critical, it was dire. She was in a deep coma, unresponsive and silent. The realization sent a shiver through everyone, but for Lulu, it was unbearable. For Lulu, the sight of Maxie lying so still was a mirror of her own past. She knew too well the suffocating prison of a coma, the way life outside continued while the body inside remained locked in darkness. To watch Maxie now, her best friend, fall into that same cruel fate was almost more than she could endure. Memories of her own struggle, the helplessness, and the years lost flooded back, leaving her trembling. She had once relied on Maxie's fierce loyalty to pull her through, and now, with the roles reversed, Lulu could only cling to the hope that her presence might somehow anchor Maxie to life. For their family, the blow was immeasurable. They had to watch a woman who had committed no crime, who had only sought to defend truth and integrity, be robbed of her voice and her strength. In that sterile hospital room, where machines hummed and monitors blinked, the injustice felt crushing. Maxie, innocent yet defiant, had been reduced to silence in the cruelest of ways. As updates trickled in, Lulu's dread only deepened. The investigation was at a standstill. No one could produce definitive proof, no one dared name Sidwell outright, and yet his shadow loomed over every whispered conversation. The pieces fit too perfectly, the motive too clear. Even Lucy, who had clung to denial, could no longer ignore that Maxie's stance against corruption had marked her as a target. What began as shock and confusion now hardened into grim resolve. Beneath their grief and fear, those who loved Maxie knew this could not end in silence. Someone had orchestrated this, and that someone would pay. Spinelli refused to allow what happened to Maxie to be swept under the rug. For him, this was not just about uncovering the truth but about honoring the woman who had risked everything to stand against corruption. He threw himself into the investigation with the intensity of a man possessed, poring over every shipment record of the cosmetics line, analyzing digital files from the deception laboratories, and tracing supply chains that stretched across state lines. Every spreadsheet, every invoice, every irregular entry became a potential clue. He mapped out timelines, cross-referenced employee access, and even dug into the communications of distributors who had handled the product. The deeper he went, the clearer it became that this was not the work of amateurs. Whoever orchestrated the poisoning had taken every precaution, covering tracks with surgical precision, erasing electronic trails, and ensuring that the tampering blended seamlessly into legitimate business operations. Despite the careful obfuscation, Spinelli's conviction never wavered. He knew there was intent behind the act, and not just intent to harm Maxie. This was a statement, a chilling warning to anyone bold enough to challenge those in power. By striking down Maxie in such a public and devastating way, the perpetrators meant to silence not just her but the very idea of resistance. Spinelli understood that he was now standing on dangerous ground, following a trail that powerful people did not want uncovered. And yet, he pushed forward with a grim determination, driven by equal parts love and vengeance. He promised himself that no matter how long it took, the truth would surface, and when it did, the ones responsible would face consequences that matched the cruelty of their crime. While Spinelli immersed himself in this shadowy hunt, life in Port Charles pressed on, carrying with it other conflicts and betrayals. Drew, entangled in his own crisis, scrambled to secure Martin as a witness in his legal battle against Michael. His desperation was evident, but Martin was reluctant, weighed down by his own involvement in the tangled investigation surrounding Stella. Doubt festered on every side, and alliances that had once seemed firm began to fracture. Drew's frustration grew sharper, his anger bubbling just beneath the surface as he realized that even those he counted on could not be trusted fully. Yet, no matter how bitterly these disputes played out, the pall cast by Maxie's collapse overshadowed everything. Her suffering became the silent backdrop to every conversation, every decision, a reminder of how fragile life and trust had become. The tragedy that had struck Maxie was not a twist of fate or an unfortunate medical setback. It was a deliberate act of malice, carefully executed to strip her of her voice and her power. She had only wanted to protect the truth, to shield others from deception, and for that, she now lay motionless, suspended between life and death. Her loved ones could only watch, powerless, as machines kept her tethered to the world she had fought so fiercely to protect. The injustice was unbearable. Yet, in their grief, a spark of resolve ignited. They would not let her sacrifice fade into silence. Even if the path forward was dark and uncertain, they clung to the belief that the truth would one day pierce through the lies, and that the guilty would be forced to reckon with the weight of their actions. For Mac, the pain was almost unendurable. He had faced countless perils throughout his career, battled criminals, and stared death in the face more times than he could count. But nothing compared to the agony of watching his daughter collapse without warning, her body betraying her in a way he could neither fight nor prevent. Seeing her now, lying pale and unresponsive in the hospital bed, surrounded by the relentless beeping of monitors, tore at the very core of his being. He replayed the moment over and over in his mind, haunted by the thought that he should have done more, should have shielded her from the dangers lurking in the shadows. The guilt was corrosive, gnawing at him in the quiet hours as he sat outside the recovery room, his head bowed, his hands clenched. Yet, beneath the grief and self-reproach, a different fire began to burn. Mac knew this was not an accident. Someone had chosen to strike Maxie down, and that made this fight personal. He made a silent vow to himself, one forged in the crucible of love and sorrow: he would not rest until the truth was uncovered. This was no longer simply an investigation to him. It was a war, a crusade to reclaim justice for his daughter who had been robbed of her voice. Whoever was behind this attack had underestimated the strength of a father's love and the resolve of a man who had spent his life bringing criminals to justice. Mac would hunt them down, no matter how deep they tried to bury the truth, and he would not stop until they paid the ultimate price for what they had done. Spinelli's pain carried with it a haunting quality, one that dug into his soul and refused to let go. Maxie had long been his anchor, the light he clung to when the shadows in his life threatened to overwhelm him. She had given him a sense of belonging, a purpose beyond his own eccentricities and fragile self-worth. And now, seeing her lying motionless, her life reduced to the rhythm of machines and monitors, that foundation crumbled beneath him. The world that once made sense through the filter of her presence collapsed into chaos, leaving him adrift in an ocean of despair. In the days that followed her collapse, Spinelli all but disappeared into his own private exile. He locked himself away in his workspace, surrounded by the glow of computer screens and scattered papers. Sleep became an enemy, food and rest were afterthoughts. His eyes, bloodshot and raw from exhaustion, fixated on every line of code, every shipment record, every lab report connected to the ill-fated cream that had touched Maxie's skin before she fell. His fingers flew over the keyboard with manic energy, as if sheer determination could bend the digital world to his will and force it to yield the truth. The guilt gnawed at him relentlessly. He replayed their last conversations, every smile she had given him, every subtle warning he had failed to heed. He told himself he should have anticipated the danger, should have done more to shield her from the storm he knew was brewing around deception and Sidwell. That guilt became a constant whisper in his ear, accusing him, tormenting him, reminding him that he had failed the one person who mattered most. And yet, beneath the anguish, a darker flame grew. Compassion and grief gave way to fury, and soon Spinelli found himself consumed by a singular desire: vengeance. Every thought of Sidwell made his chest tighten, rage bubbling so hot it nearly stole his breath. He imagined the man's smug face, the calculating coldness of someone who could orchestrate such cruelty, and the images played like fuel to the fire. His mind began to circle obsessively around the idea of retribution, the possibility of making Sidwell suffer as Maxie now suffered. But in his more lucid moments, Spinelli knew the danger of this path. He understood, in a way only he could, how easy it would be to let the darkness take over, to lose himself to the same ruthless instincts as the people he despised. He could feel the shadow creeping closer with each sleepless night, threatening to consume him, to transform him into something unrecognizable. And still, he could not stop. Because for him, the fight was no longer just about exposing corruption or stopping a criminal. It was about protecting Maxie, even if she could not hear him, even if she never opened her eyes again. His obsession became his vow, that as long as she lay silent, he would not rest until the truth was unearthed and her attacker destroyed. For Lulu, the torment was of a different kind. The sight of Maxie's still form pulled her back violently into her own past, a past she had tried to bury but could never truly escape. She remembered with agonizing clarity what it felt like to be the one in the hospital bed, her body unresponsive while life carried on without her. She remembered the hollow ache of time slipping away in darkness, and the helplessness of knowing her family was suffering while she could do nothing to reach them. Now, watching her best friend endure the same cruel fate, it felt as though history was mocking her. Tears came easily, uncontrollably, as Lulu sat at Maxie's bedside, clutching her hand as if sheer willpower could bring her back. The memories of Maxie's strength during Lulu's own coma surfaced with every breath. Maxie had never left her, had spoken to her daily, believing in her return when no one else dared to hope. That unwavering loyalty had been a lifeline, and Lulu could not ignore the bitter irony that it was now her turn to sit vigil, to pour strength into a friend who could not hear her. The thought that Maxie might never wake was unbearable. The injustice of it, this vibrant, selfless woman struck down simply because she had dared to fight for the truth, filled Lulu with both grief and fury. The world felt tilted, unfair beyond reason, and Lulu found herself torn between despair and determination. She feared the worst, but she could not allow fear to paralyze her. She made a silent promise to herself that she would not abandon Maxie, not for a single moment. If Maxie was to wander in the darkness of a coma, Lulu would be there, a steady presence, refusing to let her friend walk that path alone. Even as whispers of Sidwell's involvement reached her ears, even as the dangers of pressing too hard into his affairs became evident, Lulu steeled herself. She had been broken before, she had clawed her way back from the void, and she would do it again if it meant giving Maxie a chance to survive. For Lulu, this was more than friendship. It was a bond forged in fire, tested by tragedy, and now bound by unshakable loyalty. She would fight, against fear, against corruption, against the darkness itself, because Maxie deserved nothing less. Each of them carried their grief differently, as though their hearts had been shattered into separate pieces of the same broken mirror, each shard reflecting their pain in its own distinct way. Yet despite these differences, they were all chained to the same unrelenting image, Maxie, silent and still, suspended between life and death. That vision haunted them relentlessly. It followed them into every quiet moment, invaded their sleep, and echoed in the stillness of their thoughts. Every hour that passed without change deepened the wound, pressing it further into their souls until it felt as though the very act of waiting was a punishment in itself. It was not merely grief they carried but a suffocating sense of injustice, a constant reminder that the woman who had given so much was being forced to pay the cruelest price for her courage. The hospital room itself became a kind of prison. The sterile walls, the sharp antiseptic scent, the constant hum of machinery, it all combined into a relentless chorus of fragility. The monitors blinked in steady rhythm, machines tethering Maxie to life, each beep reminding them that she was alive but absent, present but unreachable. They watched the faint rise and fall of her chest, searching desperately for any flicker of change, for the smallest gesture that might suggest she was fighting her way back. But she remained unmoving, her silence becoming a weight that grew heavier with each passing day. To Mac, the pain was both familiar and foreign. He had dedicated his life to protecting others, to chasing down those who thrived on destruction and cruelty. He had faced violence, betrayal, and even death without faltering, always finding a way to endure. But nothing in his years of service, nothing in his long career, had prepared him for this, the helplessness of watching his daughter lie broken, knowing that the enemy was invisible, hidden behind layers of deceit and power. He sat for hours at her bedside and in the quiet hallways outside, his hands clenched, his jaw set, wrestling with guilt that cut deeper than any wound. He replayed every moment of the past, wondering if there had been a sign, something he had missed, something he could have prevented. His failure to shield her weighed on him like a stone around his neck. Yet alongside his guilt rose an unwavering determination. If this was a war, then he would fight it. Whoever had done this to Maxie had made a grave mistake, because Max Scorpio was not a man who ever gave up. Spinelli's grief manifested differently, in ways that threatened to unravel him completely. For years, Maxie had been his guiding light, the person who grounded him when his mind spun too quickly, the one who made his eccentricities seem less like flaws and more like unique threads of his being. She was his stability, his balance, his heart. To see her now, surrounded by machines, silent and still, ripped that stability from him and left him spiraling into chaos. He retreated into his work, barricading himself in his office where computer screens cast cold light across his pale, sleepless face. He combed through every digital footprint tied to deception, every record of shipments, every batch of formulas.